So welcome, for those of you who have flown in recently, welcome to Limassol for Mr. Misilis. Thank you very much for attending. I guess one of the main issues that we see here and that we can benefit from is sharing experience. Sharing your experience from other areas and other jurisdictions, as well as the in-depth experience from the property sector and the investments in that area. And maybe we could start with Mr. Misilis. How do you see the property investment sector going? Is there risks of overheating in the area? And just in general, what is your sentiment right now?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Natalia, for the invitation. First of all, please allow me to touch upon a couple of points that were mentioned earlier during the presentations. Of course, the talks about the possible global recession. Recession is not good for anyone, but the talks about it, the fact that European government bonds, especially German yields, have gone below zero. The fact that interest rates, deposit accounts in the European banks are zero on average. All these items are currently helping the Cyprus real estate market. I gave a speech in New York 10 days ago, and there it was established that to some extent the uncertainty of Brexit is also driving international property investors to Cyprus. I'll give you another example. Property values in Dubai are dropping. Investors from the Middle East do not feel so confident in investing in Dubai right now, obviously. So this is the first time that we see institutional interest for property investments in Cyprus. Then there is a couple of areas which attract a lot of attention for property investment. Namely, is the student accommodation. Philip already mentioned how much the education sector is growing. Just to give you an indication, last year it contributed over 700 million euros to the local economy. There is a serious shortage of student housing, so we see a lot of investment going into that area. It's worth knowing that Goldman Sachs invested in one of the universities a few years ago. So it's the second American institution investing in Cyprus education. Then we have tourism. You know that we had 3 or 4 years of record arrivals. Maybe the geopolitics and the situation is helping, but this is a fact. So we see increasing interest in the areas of tourism-related projects, anything related to tourist infrastructure, hotel developments, redevelopments. Marinas, of course, are part of this. The biggest project right now on the island, which is the integrated casino resort. And because of this sector, we have an increased short-term let industry that has grown in the recent years. Airbnb reported that over 125,000 tourists arrived in Cyprus using the Airbnb platform last year. This is only set to grow. And because of that, we see an increasing interest in dedicated buy-to-let projects. So I can see the market growing. The numbers give us these facts. And I feel that the potential is really good and the foundations are quite solid. Maybe I can stop here for now, and later I would like to answer to 2 of the questions that Philip presented during his presentation. How much will the market grow, and how much will the Cyprus Investment Program be allowed to contribute towards this market? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Artem, thank you very much for participating and for coming in. I know you have a very comprehensive picture of the real business relationship between Russia and Cyprus, and I mean actual projects, not just the statistics, but the projects behind them. One of the main, I would say, negative developments has been the role of other countries basically in determining the fate of the banking sector here and new regulations and new requirements. How are Russian investors evaluating Cyprus right now, and what are some of the alternatives that they're looking at, or how are they seeking to solve the banking issue here?
Hello? Hello? What should I do? Think so. Hello. Very good question. Thank you. In fact, I believe that the most participants of this Congress, the Russian businessmen and investors permanently living here and remembering times before bailout, all of us remember the situation, how easy, and it was also a problem, but still, it's just a comparison, how easy was the process of opening a bank account. It creates huge problems. It created huge problems, results we see right now. I believe that here everybody knows that the regulators' approach to the local commercial banks was so tough that for all banks located in Cyprus, it was much easier not to work with all high-risk clients. I'm not speaking right now only about Russians, but since Russians were covered by sanctions as a country as well as personal rights, the Cyprus banks now open accounts for Russian passport holders, I can say, only in case if they have residence permit in Cyprus. Without, it's almost impossible. If we speak about the Cyprus companies, where we have the directors or UBOs Russians, mainly of course UBOs, that's the same, quite problematic, which is not the situation that we see only in Cyprus, for example. We can see the same in Hong Kong. It's very funny that Hong Kong doesn't open accounts both for United States citizens and Russians. For United States because of FATCA, and for them it's easier not to deal with FATCA, rather to deal, and for Russians because of sanctions. But I hope that this situation will be changed. We see now the governance of local regulator will be changed, and the new head of central bank will use another approach rather than previous one, which position was it's better to do nothing rather to have any risks. From our experience, how our clients solve the problems, answering your question, or partners, they are getting local residence permits by different reasons, not only using the investment passport scheme, but also the renting apartments, buying property, establishing companies, and getting the working permits. So use different ways that provide them an opportunity to be qualified as locals and open the accounts in Cyprus banks. Either go to the Switzerland and Luxembourg.
Thank you. Jimmy, thank you very much for coming up from Dubai.
Thanks for having me.
It's interesting because in many ways Dubai is kind of like a model that Cyprus has been following in many respects. The idea of a relatively hydrocarbon resource poor economy, which really developed a destination out of nowhere, relying on transport, logistics, foreign investment, company management, and so on and so forth. I'd like to ask you two questions. Number one is we hear different things about the situation there. If you could comment roughly how you see things going, and also how that affects the potential investments in Cyprus or Cyprus's role for the clients that you represent.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to add one thing that Artem was saying with the banking. Is in Dubai, it's very much the same issue, but not just for Russians. I mean, to open an account there without some sort of a residence permit is almost impossible now. And I mean, I think that's just with the regulation with the banks and anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism has just gotten very, very strict everywhere for politically exposed persons or people from high-risk jurisdictions. In terms of Dubai, I mean, I think the economy there is not doing fantastic. The property market's very, very down. I do see some real business happening though, in terms of, it is the gateway to Africa, and Africa is kind of the new frontier that's booming right now. A lot of that money is flowing through Dubai. Dubai was also, up until Iran was re-sanctioned, most of the money flowing into Iran was flowing through Dubai, and certainly most investments in the Middle East flow through Dubai because of people's confidence in its regulatory system, its legal framework, the fact that English is also an official language, and that they've made the process for establishing residency and so on and so forth very, very clear. I mean, that's the one thing that I think Dubai has done very, very well as a country, is they've made the process in terms of investing there, in terms of getting residency, relatively simple and straightforward. And that's attracted a lot of people where, in many jurisdictions there's a subjectivity in terms of like character and fitness, or these different things of whether or not you're going to get a residency permit, and Dubai doesn't really have this. It's very cut and dry. This is what you do, and you get the residency permit.
Great. And if you look at Cyprus and just how Cyprus is developing, do you see any parallels, any similarities, any recommendations that Cyprus could follow?
I mean, I think Cyprus has developed its laws very, very well. I mean, quite frankly, I mean, in my business, I work with clients and help them set up structures all over the world. And when I look at Cyprus, being that it's in the EU, it has tremendous legal framework. I mean the laws that it has around like intellectual property taxation, the non-dom program, all these things, they're fantastic. I mean, they're some of the best in Europe. I think the biggest problem that Cyprus has is a reputational one, that it still needs to rebuild a little bit. And I think as long as it's able to do that, I think it's very well positioned. I mean, when you look at who its competitors are within the EU, like Malta, for example, I think Cyprus is very well positioned, and from what I understand, I haven't helped anybody get residency or citizenship in Cyprus, but from what I understand is it's a relatively straightforward process, much like it is in Dubai, and I think that is very helpful for Cyprus.
Great, good to hear. Thank you. Ajay, we met by chance in Kiev over the weekend and had quite a long discussion. You've been in Cyprus for a good number of years, and your presentation shows a really clear way forward. What if you could list like just 3 immediate things that the government should do? What would those be?
Yeah, I would say just one. I mean, in fact, the government has done a lot, and everything seems to be going in the right direction. But I think Jimmy is right in that the risk is mostly reputational. Compared with Hong Kong, Cyprus is much easier place to do business and to open bank accounts. In Dubai, they just started having courts in English language, and DIFC courts were always in English language. In Cyprus, this remains an issue. The level of e-governance that we see in Dubai, for example, and the transparency we see in Hong Kong and now in China, is something that Cyprus can aspire to. We are lagging very far behind in e-governance, in transparency, in accountability towards of the public institutions towards the public, and especially towards the very important sector or a segment of foreign investors. So look, all in all, I still believe in Cyprus after all these years, because I think things are good. It's a good country to do business in. It's a good country to invest in. It's a good country to operate from. And I think it is a very good sign that we are moving in the same direction as Dubai or London, that if you want to do business on the island, you have to be resident here. Or one of your partners or directors have to be a resident here. That era of a post-box operation is long over. It's not coming back. It's never coming back, and thank goodness for that. So there's no such thing as offshore anymore, except maybe Switzerland. And you know, when we talk about difficulty of attitudes or regulation towards Russians, who are the biggest participants and investors in Cyprus economy, I want to just bring to your attention that for about 10-15 years, the most negative and almost diabolical attitude towards Russians has been in the Baltic countries. And yet they laundered $140 billion of Russian dirty money through Scandinavian banks that are whiter than white, through Baltic countries. And then they say that Cyprus has a problem? No, we don't have a money laundering problem. Not on that scale. We don't have a dirty money problem. The institutions work here very well. And I was talking to one of the bankers, and I said, what are you doing? You closed 15,000 accounts. He said, none that should not have been closed. So we're not sorry to see all these bank accounts go. What we would like to see is that the business should behave, it should follow the rule of law, it should embrace the kind of rules of conduct that are expected of it. And Cyprus remains and can only do better a good place to do business, and especially banking operations.
Thank you. I guess one of the main issues regarding reputation does originate from the passport scheme or the visa scheme. And I was amazed doing some research earlier this year on the American, the EB-14, that program. In fact, America has given a vast number of passports and residence every year to Chinese citizens at the same time when it has a very active trade war with China going on. So I find it a bit ironic that Cyprus is put in a somewhat different position.
I just wanted to add, I mean, I think in terms of money laundering, the U.S. is the biggest money launderer in the world, and they're always the ones screaming money laundering, that everybody else is doing it. So the fact that they're giving it to the Chinese when they're in a trade war doesn't surprise me at all. They're all about the money.
Interesting. Mr. Michelis, maybe you could comment a bit about, you had raised the issues earlier about the future of the passport scheme and how you see that going. Maybe this is a good time to bring this up.
Yes, of course. Let me comment on a couple of points mentioned earlier, two particular slides that I have a different view, and I feel that the numbers presented didn't give the full picture. First of all, about the market growing. We saw a graph earlier, property transactions from 2010 onwards, about 8,500 in 2010. The numbers were reducing, obviously, until 2013 when they hit rock bottom, about 3,500, if I remember correctly, in 2013, and growing at a rate of about 20% every year since the banking crisis in Cyprus, reaching 8,500 in 2017. That's when Philip's graph stopped. 9,300, if I'm not mistaken, last year. So this graph shows that in the last 8 years we have recovered. 8,500 2010, we went through the crisis, 9.3 last year. So one can say that we are more or less where we should be. But this is half the story. The problem is the starting point. 2010 was 3 years into the global economic crisis. In order for you to have a full picture, you should see the Cyprus transactions since 1998, 1999, a decade before the global financial crisis. If you see the annual property transactions from 98 until 2006, we were averaging about 13,000 every year. It was between 12 to 14 depending on the year, and that was because of some global events. 2007 2007, 2008 were the years of the bubble, so the numbers increased. So 13,000 annual transactions should be our target, which was the average of the decade preceding the global financial crisis. So the 9.3 we did last year is well below the average we did the decade before the financial crisis. So that's the first point I wanted to make, just to indicate where the market should go. And this average I mentioned for that decade ignore today's fundamentals, ignore immigration incentives, and ignore the fact that what we said before, that a few global property investors are feeling that the volatility they see in other places is a bit too much and they look for a safer investment, so they started to look at Cyprus as well. So the market could even grow a little bit more than the 13,000. The second point I wanted to touch upon is the number of passports or applicants we have because of the Cyprus investment program. In the slide we saw earlier, the number included dependents. Of course, that's not very relevant because it doesn't matter how many children one investor has. We need to see the investor number. Last year we did 530 approvals. That's it. The government imposed a roof at 700 a year and a half ago. Last year we didn't even reach it. I seriously doubt whether we will reach it this year. There is serious interest, global interest for this scheme, but the level of investment filters the market. So we never reach the roof. We might do, which is a good thing because we have a bigger number of investors. AJ said we should have thousands. Maybe we should, but we haven't reached it. The average properties, let's see how much the property market depends on this scheme. The average properties per investor is 2. Some investors buy more than 2, obviously. Many investors buy only 1. That's why you have an increase in the super prime area, especially in Limassol. So the average number is 2. So this says that more or less 1,000 properties every year are being sold because of the CIP scheme. So if you see the dependency, 9.3 thousand total transactions in property last year, 1,000 properties sold because of the CIP, it's about 10%. And that's only natural. Take any market and you will see that the 10% is niche. Take cars, 10% is niche, 10% is supercars. It's the Bugattis and the Bentleys and I don't know what. So it's only natural. Now, whether it should continue, I absolutely agree. Yes, it should continue. And to be honest, domestically, there is no serious talks of stopping this scheme. Of course, there are pressures, but pressures could be handled. So yes, it should be continued. This is not something that we invented. Australia and Canada, mentioned earlier, and the US have been having these schemes for decades. And Cyprus is known to be very welcoming to foreigners since the beginning of this republic. So I see absolutely no reason why it should stop. Whether it should be, the scheme should be expanded to include more sectors. I think we're well on our way to seeing improvements like this. Some of the changes are being implemented as of tomorrow. So we're starting to see a general expansion of this scheme, and also the startup of a fund that will allow weak categories of citizens being assisted because of this scheme. I think IJ touched that during his presentation, that the contribution of this scheme to the society should assist a wider range of citizens. So that's exactly what the government implemented 3 years ago. actually decided three months ago, and it will be implemented as of tomorrow.
Thank you. Jimmy, quick question again on Dubai and just what we can learn from that. One of Dubai's successes has also been to develop a financial center and the international financial center, and that's been a priority for Cyprus as well. There's been a determined effort to attract investment funds, but the level of funds actually based here is still relatively low. Now, I know that you're dealing with high net worth individuals, maybe not so much on the fund side, but what are some things that Cyprus could learn from this area? You know, the idea of like developing one cluster or like one focal point and really marketing that internationally.
I mean, I think it's been a good idea. I mean, I do have some experience on the fund side, and quite frankly, you know, usually when we're looking to register funds, we're looking for places that have a regulatory scheme that the markets will accept. And so a lot of times, especially if you're going to have something, you know, public in London or something like that, you're looking at Jersey and Guernsey. But I think what is very important that Dubai's done very well is that it is a well-regulated environment. I mean, that's something it used to be that the Cayman Islands was sort of the place to go register funds because of a lack of regulation. It was very easy to go register funds there. The managers didn't need any special regulatory approval, and that's kind of dead now. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants something regulated. And so I think that that's something that Dubai's done very well is they've created the Dubai International Financial Center. The funds are regulated there. They have their own courts there to govern them and resolve disputes. The rules are up to international standards, and I think that that's been done very, very well. And I think in terms of Cyprus, especially being an EU jurisdiction, which has a lot of advantages for doing business, obviously, within the EU, as opposed to being a jurisdiction outside, I think that presents a very big opportunity for Cyprus, and I think that that would be a very good idea to have, you know, sort of a central place where you can register the funds, where they're regulated, where you can do the applications. I think that would be very, very good, and especially if it's recognized by the markets, so that if it's regulated under this jurisdiction, that it's very easy to take it public.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Artem, please.
In fact, I'd like to add that from my point of view, if Cyprus wants to develop itself as a financial center, that's only one way. That's the development of new financial institutions. And because of banking industry and banking sector is absolutely local now, and it serves only local needs, and there is no reasonable perspective to see any international future of banking sector in Cyprus. The financial services sector is very interesting and very perspective, and Cyprus, in fact, it has very good regulation. It has not bad regulator in comparison with other traditional offshore financial center like Jersey, Guernsey, and Isle of Man, and etc. Well-educated people, and in fact the relatively cost-effective in comparison with other financial jurisdictions, especially with Luxembourg. I see that Cyprus has truly competitive advantages that give Cyprus an opportunity to compete in nearest future, not with regional financial centers like Dubai, Jersey, Guernsey, but with the international one like Luxembourg or Cayman. That's still the international financial center regarding asset management.
If I just want to add one thing, I think one big advantage that Cyprus does have that I agree with is with all the new laws, especially regarding substance requirements, and that management of the funds or that the direction of the management company themselves take place in the jurisdiction where the manager is resident. When you start looking at Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, you really have a lack of professionals there that can actually do the management. And I think that that's something that Cyprus has a big advantage, is that they have the talent necessary to provide that management from within Cyprus and give it the substance that it needs in order to comply with international standards. And I think that is a big advantage.
Excellent, thank you. Ajay, you recently invested in Kiev in a tech firm, and you have also relations in India with another tech firm. And this is clearly, if we look at technology, if we look at actual development and programming, we're looking at what amounts to a core competency, I think, as we move forward. What would Cyprus need to do to attract both development firms but also technology-reliant firms?
I would say two things. First, just as you have for citizens, the citizen service centers. In some countries they call it My Government. I think in Cyprus it's called Citizen Service Center, where all government services are available through a single window. I think it's high time Cyprus government creates a single window service center for foreign investors. Because what is happening is that you are running from pillar to post, from one department to another, labor department, immigration department, all kinds of different things. And that gives rise to a lot of agents who are rather unscrupulous. And they create this negative reputation of the island. So this is something the government could do, that the investors should have a single window clearance where they can obtain information about all the schemes which are available. And there are some very good schemes. So there is a very good scheme for IT sector, in fact. I think it's one of the more attractive schemes in Europe, again, for giving residence permits and giving tax benefits. But a lot of people just don't know about it. So perhaps one good idea could be to turn SIPA not into a marketing organization, but in fact as a service provider. That people should deal with one set of very well-educated, very helpful officials, and then they deal with the various government departments rather than sending investors running around the island talking to different government offices. That's first. The second is, I think Jimmy would be better qualified to comment on that, is the Dubai experience of creating clusters, the media city, internet city. So I think Cyprus needs a few clusters. I believe there's a need for a healthcare cluster, an ecotourism cluster, a IT city cluster, an education cluster, and those clusters, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We didn't invent the wheel on passport schemes.
This is what OECD said. There was a few reactions from Cyprus, and about a couple of months later, the European Commission issued an explanation that the banking institution could be tricked and not report back to the country of origin, but report to the country that is running the program. So imaginary scenario, Russian investor invests in Cyprus, gets the program, opens an account in Cyprus, deposits a huge amount. The Cypriot bank does not report back to Russia, but reports to Cyprus, so because it's local, they don't report. So this is what OECD says, and it poses a risk to common reporting standard. Now, if one reads carefully the International Directive for Common Reporting, it says that banking institutions should not report to the country of residence, should not report to the country of origin, should report to the country where the account holder pays taxes. You could be Cypriot, living in Greece, but paying taxes in Brussels, Belgium. So again, what's the connection between OECD and the CIP program?
It is this report that you mentioned in which they specified the Cyprus, among other countries, as being one of the countries where there is a risk of, on the one side, due diligence. So they raise the question, is due diligence being handled correctly? And on the other hand, as a potential threat to CRS. But, sorry, yeah, definitely. But definitely, there are a lot of internal contradictions, both within the OECD, but also within EU policy in this area. And one of the observations I've made in analysis and on consulting until now is that there is more heat than light, I think, in this area. So there's a lot of hot air, but there are very few clarifications as to what actually will be done. And in discussions here in Cyprus, I think everyone agrees that unless there's going to be another major financial crisis and Cyprus has to ask for bailout, I believe that there will not be any substantial change to the system as it is now. I think the great threat is really what happened in 2013, where in fact again we had policy being made by the Troika on the fly, and where we had solutions being implemented for Cyprus which had never been implemented anywhere else. So hopefully that will not happen again. Artem.
Just legal comment. You're absolutely right. You know the CRS directive very well. It means that in fact the comments of OECD are not relevant at all. It's just populistic and political pressure. That's all on the program. It's not legally correct. The banks report to the tax authority where the client of the bank has tax resident status. Done. That's all.
I think I might add to that. It also concerns the origin of wealth, because there have been cases when the reporting has been done regarding the local resident, but actually the origin of wealth was an IMF loan which was given to a country, and the money was siphoned off through a network of banks of that country onto an offshore jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction refused to report, saying, we are going to report to ourselves because the person is resident here. So it concerns not only about the current resident status of the person, but both about the origin of that person and the origin of wealth.
If we will speak about different cases that arise during these few years of CRS directive implementation, a huge number of incorrect implementation of the new ruling. Directive is straightforward. Tax residency, done. Then if we start to think about source of wealth, origin, something else, some banks from the beginning, they asked for passport, and that's all. That was they were interested in, and it's just cases that reflect not good understanding of new regulation. First of all, by the banks, done, and their compliance.
I believe this issue is going to remain and get more serious and more important. It's not going to go away. Ultimately, the source of wealth remains a very big issue, especially in economies which are supported by public money.
Yes, but I'm speaking just about the regulation.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
how I like these public discussions and panel discussions. And the good thing is that we can continue talking for half an hour more, but drinking tea and coffee as well. Philip, you maybe want to summarize what we heard, and we go for coffee because we still have 2 panel discussions on the second on the second plenary session. Our summary is?
So very briefly, I think we agree that smarter regulation is a good thing. I think it's, whether it's from investors in Dubai or in Russia or other areas, we're looking for an EU jurisdiction which has transparent regulation, which complies with international standards. The era of the post office box or the brass plate firm is probably over, and that's probably a good thing. There's probably a lot of daylight between sources of compliance and how compliance is interpreted by banks, by tax authorities, and by some other actors. And I think we do see that Cyprus is doing a good job. And from my viewpoint, I'm very glad to see that there is really this extremely high level of expertise available for investors. And it's really, really very gratifying to see.
From my part, I would like to thank all the panelists for this interesting conversation we had all together. And I'm sure that people in the audience will have many more questions to you, and we can continue discussing it. We'll meet here at 11 o'clock sharp to continue with other panels. So a coffee break. Thank you. Round of applause.